It's 8 o'clock Friday night and all is quiet in front of the Sam Houston Coliseum ticket window. But it wasn't always that way. For years and years, this was where Houston wrestling took place. Houston wrestling was a Houston institution. Thousands upon thousands look forward to Friday night, the fun and the excitement of Houston wrestling. For the next 2 hours, we'll take a look at the life and times of the promoter of Houston wrestling, Mr. Paul Boesch. The late, the great Mr. Paul Boesch, a great citizen, a great Houstonian, a Houston institution.
In tribute to a Houston legend, Channel 39 presents The Life and Times of Paul Boesch. During the next 2 hours, relive the moments that made wrestling a Houston tradition. The Life and Times of Paul Boesch is brought to you in part by Gallery Furniture. Gallery Furniture really will save you money.
Often asked questions about Mr. Boesch was, did he ever wrestle? You bet he wrestled. He didn't get ears like that simply by appearing in an Irv Marx jewelry commercial. Mr. Boesch was quite accomplished in the squared circle. As you'll see from the following footage, Mr. Boesch really knew his way around the wrestling ring.
The gentleman with the long tights is a man named Dick Schickat, who had defeated, Jim Londos defeated for the world heavyweight title. There is this young fellow named Boesch applying a head scissor, and here you see now with that fast and speedy getaway. This is a Japanese arm lock applied by Schickat, and now a leg stretch applied by, or a leg split applied to Schickat. Schickat was from Germany. He was a tough man. He wrestled in Houston many, many times back in the 1930s, as did his brother Paul Schickat. And here you see the pressure being put on the foot. The only thing I envy about this picture is the hair. So Schickat is trying to make the ropes. Those ropes are tied together. This was a big ring in the Bronx Coliseum, and they were tied together in the hope of keeping people from falling through them. This shoulder butt, and here is Schickat being pursued and mauled around by the shoulder butt, which was at that time one of the holds I favored. Here is a ride-em cowboy type hold, a figure 4 body scissor. But now we shift to another match, if you'll pardon the quick change of site. This is the St. Nicholas Arena, which was torn down recently, incidentally, and was a famous landmark. And Jack Sherry, one of the leading heavyweight contenders and one of the old-time tough fellows, is my opponent on this occasion. Now you see various versions of a head scissor as Sherry tries to get out. Here is a rocking chair split. The men sitting around the ringside there are the press and judges, as required by the state of New York. And here I go again for the same rocking chair split and use of the shoulder butt and the flying tackle. Sherry was a tough individual and a hard man to wrestle, as anybody would tell you. And like all of our home movies, you've got to say one thing about it. They end properly. They just come apart. But if you were that old and you had been sitting around in an old box for that long, I think that you would probably appreciate the fact that almost anything can happen to you. I assure you, that wasn't in our original. We have any more left of the film? We do? Well, we'll go back there again in just a minute. We'll show you that nothing is more indomitable than a man who wants to show home movies. So Sherry is still on the receiving end. And these pictures were taken by a friend of mine, I might add, or is that obvious? And he only took them when I was doing the assaulting. And some of these things that have happened to Sherry in this particular match, I'm happy to record, because men who knew him at that particular time wouldn't agree that they could be done. But Sherry, thank goodness, found himself on the canvas more times that night than he had in many and many a moon. How did the matches make out? Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment, but the hold right now is a hammerlock, as it was for a moment, and then Sherry found himself flipped over, even bust the string in his tights, which kept him busy for a while. Again, it's a hammerlock with Sherry on the receiving end, and here is that rocking chair split. Here is an arm stretch, and all kinds of fast movement. There must have been something wrong with this film. I couldn't have been that fast. Here is Sherry again being pursued with a rolling front headlock, but he was a hard man to get down to that canvas, and an even more difficult one to do anything with, whether you were Well, those films are old enough to be historic, so you'll understand the quality of it was not exactly the usual Channel 39 quality.
A lot of people ask me, what did Mr. Boesch do for you, Mac? Mr. Boesch did lots of things for me. Number one, Mr. Boesch taught me how to use this medium called television. It's empty now in the Sam Houston Coliseum, and there's lots of echoes. But the only echoes back then were the roar of the crowd, and I'll never forget my first commercial. Mr. Boesch put his arm around me and said, "Don't worry about it, kid. I'll help you get through." If it wasn't for Mr. Boesch, there probably would not be a gallery furniture today. Mr. Boesch also taught me the importance of promotion, of always being out there, promoting your product or service, getting people to talk about you, which he did such a great job of on Houston Wrestling for all those years. And most importantly, Mr. Boesch taught me the importance of giving back to the community from which you draw your support. Mr. Boesch, we'll always miss you. You were a great man, a great Houstonian. We love you, Mr. Boesch.
There was a time really early in my career when I was wrestling one time in Atlanta, and I had this, what I thought was a really great match. It was almost like it was my first night in, and this is when I very first started, and I had come back to the dressing room after this really great match, and I was hoping that someone had seen it, and I overheard after that through like one of the walls, over the wall from behind, that the promoters never saw my match. I heard them talking about it. They never watched it. They never saw me. They didn't appreciate anything I did. They missed it. And from that point on, I never really got past the first match. But after that match, there was one guy that came up to me, and that was Paul Boesch. He came up to me and he said, "Son, you're a great wrestler, and anytime you ever want to wrestle in Houston, you come see me." And unfortunately, I never had the pleasure of working for Paul Boesch, but I found out after all that, as far as I've come, that I owe a lot more to Paul Boesch than just that compliment. He's the one that introduced my mother and father together, and my father's known Paul Boesch for years. So it was a very special compliment coming from a great man, a great wrestler, and a great promoter.
If you're looking for a sale this Labor Day weekend without all the hype, but with true savings and furniture that's in stock, come to Gallery Furniture's giant Labor Day weekend super sale. We've got selected made-in-America furniture items marked down as much as 50%. Best of all, buy your furniture during the Gallery Furniture Labor Day weekend super sale. Buy it today, save lots of money. Gallery Furniture delivers tonight. No waiting, no back order slip. Immediate delivery, immediate financing during Gallery Furniture giant Labor Day weekend super sale. Save up to 50%. Gallery saves you money.
There's nothing like the taste of Bluebell homemade ice cream. There's nothing like the taste of the very best.
Eat all we can, and we sell the rest. It's all made, homemade down home. Bluebell, the best ice cream in the country.
Bluebell, the best ice cream in the country. Yodeloo.
Well, I'd like to say one thing about Paul Boesch. You know, it seems like the memory is still here in this big city of Houston, Texas. Would like to say again, though, you know, to Mrs. Boesch and Joey, a tribute to the legend of promoters. A man, Paul Boesch, that I respect. He's respected all over the world. He's one of the greatest promoters of all time. He started me out in professional wrestling in 1971. And I'd like to say, you know, I wish that there was still a lot of Paul Boesches still around. I've been all over the world 5 times: Japan, Australia, China, Singapore, you name it, all the 50 states. Paul Boesch, thanks to you, I fed my family. It's a living. This sport is one of the greatest sports in the world to me. Thanks again to Paul Boesch. He started me out in Houston, Texas. Like I say, I traveled all over. I met some of the biggest, the greatest stars in the world, the governors, mayors, all over. Paul Boesch, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And again, thank you. You've made me what I am today. You've taught me a lot before I ever started to wrestle, when I used to come down with my father. Friday nights at the Coliseum. Everywhere I go right now, when people recognize me and see me all over the airports, all over the city of Houston, and then also in the other states, they wonder why, and they think wrestling in Houston It's never been the same since you're gone, Paul. You're dearly missed. Again, thanks 100% from the Conway family. Thank you.
We're here at Mr. Bosch's house. Let's see if we can go upstairs and take a look at Mr. Bosch's famous study. Oh, hi, Miss Bosch. How you doing? Nice to see you.
Welcome to our home.
We're wondering if we can go upstairs and see Mr. Bosch's study.
It's going to be my pleasure to show it to you.
Great. While we're heading upstairs, let's take a look at Mr. Bosch versus Blimp Harris.
Here, through the miracle of push-button wrestling, is a bounce that registered number 9 on the Richter scale. Yes, the miracle of slow motion and computerized television. And here's the hesitation bounce. It's easy with a machine. I wish I could have done it that way, but bouncing George around just isn't possible. And this is the way it made him feel in slow motion. As a matter of fact, just take a look at that. I think he burped, but I'm not quite certain. And here is George Harris in action. You never knew that he was really a flying gazelle and that he actually had moments of hesitation when he couldn't make up his mind. But I'm glad he didn't make up his mind, because when he did, this is what happened, and he came down right smack on both of those bellies of his, and I want to tell you, that's smarts. And we thought you might enjoy this little different look at Channel 39's Houston Wrestling.
I'm here in Mr. Bosch's study, surrounded by a lifetime of memories. This is Mr. Bosch's chair. I will not sit in it because it belongs to Mr. Bosch. You know, Mr. Bosch gave a lot back to the community. You see the mementos on the wall from the Rotary Club, from the Boys Club. He was the man who made Houston a better place. Mr. Bosch taught me a lot. Now we're going to watch a very exciting wrestling match between Mr. Bosch and the famous Russian Boris Malenko.
This is my way of executing it. Oh, and there goes Dick Raines. And what happened at that particular time was that Dick was, well, I'll be darned. This is something that I never did get to see. And Dick Raines' pretty purple drawers, or whatever color they are, being exposed. And we have Boris Malenko taking full advantage of the situation. And this was a moment that was the darkest in the match, I think, when he shut off the supply of air, and I wasn't getting too much anyway, and needed a lot more at that particular time. And as he started to bear down, well, I don't know why Dick should be so modest when I'm in trouble. I think he could have best, he's there concerned with the view his rear presents, when he should be concerned more with what's happening down on that canvas.
7 minutes. 7 minutes.
Yes, you learn quickly, especially if you're in there with a professor, and that is if he does something that's effective, you might just as well try it on him. And right now, you see the results of it, and I hope that in the process of watching it on color television, you see that he was turning just a little bit blue, a little bit purple. And Dick Raines in the corner there is concerned with his pride and his modesty. And I'm more concerned with wrapping Malenko on the top rope. There was just about enough to tie him, and we see his lordship coming up here to argue about it, and we might get his lordship tied in there in the same. Well, that was a good thought. I thought of it as I was watching it on television and thought of it in the ring, and I had forgotten that particular moment. This is the first time I've seen this tape since the incident took place. So a few deep breaths, and you can see that I was breathing heavily at that particular point. But time is running out, and again, time is on my side. And by keeping after him, I'm able to do something about it. Note the sweep with the foot. A long, sweeping, reaping throw, as they call it in judo, where you can catch a man by the heels. If we've got Malenko occupied in something else besides beating my head in, maybe we can make Dick just a little less conscious of what's happening to him. You'll notice I'm breathing just a little bit deeper. I didn't want it to be quite so apparent. And Malenko himself noticed that fact. Time is starting to give out. So am I. But the time limit is what I have my eye and my ear on. Here we've got Malenko outside to try to continue the punishment, but he may or may not make it. And this works well, and I'm sure that whatever else happened to Malenko during the course of that match, that was one thing he had wished wouldn't happen. Even when you're tired, keep after them, keep moving in on them. They may be tired too, although I didn't think Malenko was quite as tired as I was. He proved it that time. Here he is now trying to cut me down to size and probably just about succeeding. The race around the ring, I was trying to find out from ring announcer Bob Stevenson what the time was and put obstacles in the path of Malenko. And that helped just to keep him away from me. Again, I'm keeping an eye on the timekeeper because this is where the outcome of this match lies. When I was younger, I used to jump up with both feet. Well, it's one thing to watch that now, but I remember the feeling in that corner, and the bell has sounded, and the feeling in that corner was certainly one of frustration because I was backed in there and I was getting all of his 235 or 40 pounds in the wrong place. You see Dick Raines as he moves over telling me that Malenko has asked for 5 more minutes. He has raised my hand, not because I won the match, but more because I lasted until the 10-minute mark had sounded. But you see the request for 5 more minutes being made by Malenko and Montague. And 5 more minutes is a long, long time. The argument here is not only with the timekeeper, but with the fans trying to get them to concur. Nobody was arguing with me, but I did have one honest statement to make, so let's listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, he wants 5 minutes. I don't think I've got 5 minutes left. As a matter of fact, I think that you have just seen the last 10 minutes of my wrestling career. Thank you very much.
Let's give him a big hand. Paul Boesch has proved that he is quite a man.
Well, so that was the end, not only of that match, but the end of the career.
I'm surrounded by the legacy of wrestling right here in this room. So many great champions' lives were touched by Mr. Boesch, such as Boris Malenko. Boris Malenko trained the 1, 2, 3 kid, and he always talked about the great Mr. Paul Boesch. Let's watch the 1, 2, 3 kid.
I'd like to say hi to all the wrestling fans down there in Houston. I'm here to say a couple words about Paul Boesch, one of the greatest wrestling promoters of all time and a legend in Houston. I never got a chance to meet Paul Boesch, but my trainer, Boris Malenko, spoke very highly of Paul Boesch, and although I never met him, he definitely influenced my career.
If you've been out shopping for furniture this Labor Day weekend and all you have to show for your hard-earned money, folks, is a furniture store back order slip, this is Mattress Mac from Gallery Furniture saying, throw that furniture store back order slip out and come to Gallery Furniture, 6006 I-45 North between Tibble and Parker. Buy your furniture today, and Gallery Furniture delivers your beautiful furniture made in America to the comfort of your own home tonight. No, 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 no back order slip. Buy your furniture today. Gallery delivers tonight. Gallery saves you money.
Hi, Wahoo McDaniels here. You know, the people wanted me to say a few things about Paul Boesch. Well, you know, I feel like I could talk all day about Paul Boesch because I like to think he was my friend, he was a promoter to me, but he not only that, he was like a father to me. You know, he helped everybody and promoted wrestling the right way, did a great job, and actually made me kind of a star here in Houston and really helped my wrestling career along, and anything I wanted from him, he would help me, but not only me, anybody that wanted to be helped by him, all they had to do was ask Paul Boesch. And I think every wrestler that ever wrestled for him will tell you there's no other promoters like Paul Boesch. And I think he's one of the greatest men that I ever met while I've been in wrestling.
There were a lot of great matches during the course of Houston wrestling, but a few really stand out. Right now I want to bring on some folks to talk about some great matches during Houston wrestling. How about the $1 Million Man and Bruce Pritchard coming right here?
Well, Jim, you know, you talk about some of the toughest guys that have ever wrestled in Houston, Texas. You have to talk about the $1 Million Man. But long before he was the $1 Million Man, he was, well, just plain old Ted DiBiase wrestling in Houston, Texas, and a great star at that, Ted DiBiase.
That's true, and I have to give a lot of credit to Paul Boesch and what he did for me in my career. But as long as we're naming names here and telling stories, Bruce Pritchard,
Well,
you
we
were
don't have to
always
tell.
known here as Bruce Pritchard. Paul Boesch brought you into the business, raised you in professional wrestling. And long after that, where you became very famous, you don't recognize it right now because his face isn't quite as red, but I'd like to introduce you to Brother Love.
Brother Love.
Oh, well, you know, I did have a lot of love. I had a lot of love for the wrestling business, had a lot of love for Houston wrestling, and a lot of love for Paul Boesch. And, you know, Jim, you were talking about some of the toughest wrestlers. Well, Houston had a reputation for attracting the toughest wrestlers anywhere in the world. And one of the toughest I can ever remember was a guy by the name of Bull Curry.
I have to agree with that. And another gentleman that was, without a doubt, a legend in his own time as well as a legend now, and a man reputed to be impervious to pain, Johnny Valentine.
Without a doubt.
How about we watch some footage of an incredible wrestling match between Bull Curry and Johnny Valentine? Let's watch.
10 seconds left in this rest period. The Bull Curry's ready to go. Whether Valentine's ready to go is doubtful. 2, 1, and there is the bell as Curry moves in and blasts away. And here he is continuing that same furious pace. Keeping on Valentine, and this crowd is going crazy with the blood splattering all over. Here is all over me as Valentine catches those blows, and Dick Raines is trying to interfere, but he is not having any luck. There goes Curry now, determined to follow Valentine right smack out of move. Get back! We're trying to keep people here from injuring themselves by getting involved in this here, but Curry is determined that he is going to keep after Valentine and pound him. Dick Raines is calling the count up in that ring. As Bull gets after him, chair in hand now, but the police got the chair out of the way, but he is after Valentine just the same. Spilling around here now to the opposite side. Both men have been counted outside the ring as they drive it home and drive us out of our chair area. Valentine bleeding tremendously. Blasted loose, and Curry.
Both men have been counted out of the ring on a 20 count.
Danny McShane is trying to separate them. And now it's Dick Raines trying to separate them, and Bull Curry letting fly impartially with those driving blows of his on McShane and Dick Raines with the seconds moving in, and we've got everything busting loose here as Raines catches it, and there goes Valentine, being grabbed by the police and snatched up the aisle. And Curry himself roaring in all directions as he moves first out into the crowd, then back into the ring. And listen to this tremendous roar of applause given to Bull Curry. The match has ended with both men being counted outside the ring. It was a draw, but draw or no, these people saw Johnny Valentine get the most tremendous battering of his life.
That was great. You know, there were a lot of great wrestlers in Houston wrestling during the glory days of Houston wrestling. Tell us about some of them.
Well, you know, Jim, Houston wrestling was a place that every wrestler in the world wanted to wrestle. Everybody wanted to come to Houston and wrestle for promoter Paul Boesch, because if you could make it here, well, you could make it anywhere, and it was tough. Some of the greats, you know, you have to think of Jose Lothario. We just saw Bull Curry and Johnny Valentine, of course, and Johnny Valentine had a great feud with Wahoo McDaniel. Mil Mascaras from Mexico, all the greats, and who could ever forget what Gino Hernandez, who made his name here in Houston, Texas, is a great star.
Big
Ted,
name,
you know
big name. Gino Hernandez is a very big name here, and what you said was very true, Bruce. If you could make it in Houston, if you could wrestle for Paul Boesch, you could virtually be it was a stepping stone to be a star anywhere in the United States or around the world. And you're talking about big men, really big men in professional wrestling. You can't leave out the spoiler.
Without a doubt.
Don Leo Jonathan, and of course the biggest man of all in professional wrestling ever, Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant. Let's watch some footage of the great big man, Andre the Giant.
We're taking a look at the opening moments of this match now. We're going to take you back here in just a few minutes via modern technology, Ted, and we're going to go to the closing moments of this matchup between Andre the Giant and the Spoiler. Right here, as the Spoiler was going for his famous claw hold, but how could you ever put it on the size
I know,
head
you
of
know,
Andre the Giant?
I've had a lot of people ask me, you know, over the course of the years, Did you ever wrestle Andre the Giant? And I've always answered no. I was never that foolish. I was in the ring with Andre many times, but fortunately, and for my better judgment, he was my partner.
Lucky you.
Yes.
Well, right now, we're going to go to the closing moments of this matchup from the Sam Houston Coliseum, the Spoiler versus Andre the Giant. And in Andre the Giant's 25 years plus in the wrestling profession, Andre was only defeated one time, and I tell you, the Spoiler here in this encounter gave it his best shot, Ted.
He sure did. As this match went on and on, you know, the Spoiler had that patented claw hold on Andre for quite some time, but that is not a position to put yourself with Andre the Giant, because that, my friend, is the end of this one.
And all Bronco Lubitsch has to do is count to 3.
What a match.
The winner, Andre the Giant.
As
one and
always.
only.
Wow, Andre was a giant of a man and a giant in so many, many ways.
Well, you know, Jim, you don't have to be 7'4" and over 500 pounds to be a giant superstar in the world of professional wrestling. Andre the Giant was probably the biggest superstar that the wrestling world has ever known. But there are other people who have wrestled here in Houston, Texas for Paul Boesch, who have gone on to make their name in the wrestling industry, who weren't 7'4". And one guy that comes to mind in particular, Roddy Piper. He wrestled here in Houston when he was only 19 years old and has gone on to become one of the biggest superstars by the World Wrestling Federation internationally. You know about Roddy,
I
Ted.
sure do. And as long as we're talking about the rowdy one, let's mention a gentleman who at this very moment is having a little trouble with Roddy Piper. They call him the King, Jerry Lawler.
He calls himself the King.
I'm Jerry the King Lawler, the undisputed king of the World Wrestling Federation. And of course everybody knows I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, where I've been known for years as the King of Memphis. But whenever I came to Houston, Texas to wrestle, I knew there was only one king in Houston, and that was Paul Boesch.
So there's one time, I remember I was in Houston, and doggone it, I can't remember the name of the arena. Of course, this is 6,000 professional matches later now, you gotta understand that. I'm standing across from me, I think it was Mad Dog Bashan. Being the star that I was in the first match. And what happens before the first match? Well, the competitors come to the ring, and Mr. Boesch stands in the ring and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem." Now, you've got to understand that I was born in Glasgow, Scotland. So the national anthem to me is "God Save Our Gracious Queen, noble Queen, God Save the Queen." So God Bless America starts, and obviously it's not Ella Fitzgerald, it's a record, right? So God bless our God, and all of a sudden, God bless America, America, the record's jamming, right? It's still no hassle to me. I'm worried about Mad Dog. All of a sudden, there's all these people, and they're all standing. And Paul Boesch says, you know, they stop it. And Paul Boesch is a real, true American man. I mean, would live and die for America, and has a real sense of pride in the young people that come to America or are born and raised in America. And so he was a little angry at the fact that the audio wasn't working. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "I want to deeply apologize," and he meant it. "And at this time, I'm going to ask Roddy Piper to play the American National Anthem on the bagpipes." I look around. Now, surely there's somebody else in this arena named Roddy Piper. And I'm looking around for kilts, and all I see is steer horns, cowboy boots, and people spitting tobacco. I stoked up the bagpipes, and I played a version of it, something possibly that AC/DC might have played, or Jimi Hendrix, I don't know. And on the high notes of the pipes, it's, you know, it's just a little flatter, it's a little sharp, because bagpipes were made for God Save Our Gracious Queen. But I'll be doggone if I didn't get through the thing. And I think some of the notes were from my fingers trembling on the chanter. And when I finished that song, that tune, that building, like, it just erupted. And from that time on, anytime I came to Houston and I would walk out, those people would give me a standing, I was lousy. Those people would give me a standing ovation. And what it just goes to show you is through serendipity and through Paul Boesch's just wisdom, his pride, and everything. It just shows you what can happen and how stars are made. And that moment in my career was the moment that changed my career from just being a guy with a dream to a guy that felt a little bit of his dream come true. And since that time now, I guess I don't have to tell you what I've done. You know what I've done. My name's Roddy Piper. And the reason I'm here now, or one of the many reasons, is a man named Paul Boesch. And for that moment, I've never had the privilege of thanking you, but from the bottom of my heart, not only did you pay well, but I always thought you were one of the finest gentlemen that I ever met, and fatherly figure, and I want to say thank you.
Jerry, my brother and I came here in June of 1959. At that time, Morris Siegel was the promoter, and Paul was his PR man. And then when Morris Siegel passed away, Paul Boesch took over. And he did one hell of a job. I can remember the Coliseum, maybe 5,000 people or less. We thought that was pretty good. After the first year, when Paul took over, it was like 10,000 people, and from then on. Seen some fantastic matches. He brought some great talent in, and I'm sure you wrestling fans can remember guys like Wahoo, Boris Maximilianovich Malenko, Mr. TV Man he'd call Paul, the Spoiler, all different guys, Johnny Valentine. And myself, working with Paul all these years, it's been a pleasure. I've got no regrets in regards to how the man treated me as a promoter. I've worked in different countries, different states, everything else, and everybody, promoters are different. A lot of them are hard line, but Paul was humanitarian. I can remember a lot of guys that say that first time to Houston, they hear about Paul Boesch being maybe a little hard-nosed and everything else, but after one meeting with the man, they say, hey, the guy's cool, he's all right. He's somebody to ride the river with, they say. So after all these years, I've made Houston my home since 1959 when Jerry and I first came here. In my association with Paul, it's been wonderful. I got fond memories. And, you know, a lot of, I go down the street, I'm at the beach or wherever, and sometimes an older person would say, you're Nick Kozak. I say, yes, thank you for remembering. And how, you remember Paul Boesch? I say, yes, I do. And it's always a warm feeling here. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here in front of you people on TV. I mean it. And it just, I guess it's just sad to see him go so quick. But anyways, like I said, fond memories. And I'm sure you people out there who have met Paul or Paul has touched your life some way realize the same thing, and you have that warm feeling also. Because I know a lot of people I've talked to, they mention that Paul Boesch, the smile comes on their face, they light up, they have good memories, and that's the main thing. Thank you.
You know, I remember this night right there when J.J. Dillon had to take a bath, courtesy of promoter Paul Boesch. Every wrestling loser had to get dunked in a
Penalty
bathtub.
match.
Penalty match.
Right.
There have been a lot of them here in Houston, Texas, and Houston wrestling. They've done everything but about the kitchen sink. In this case, it was a kitchen bathtub. I remember one time on St. Patrick's Day, though, the stipulation was that the loser had to get painted green.
I've got one for you. Leo the Lion Newman and Tony Bourne were involved in a match where somebody had to bathe a jackass.
Well, you're looking at something that took place back about 1960 or prior to that time on St. Patrick's Day. You're looking at Irish Danny McShane as he tells the fans here that he insists on painting Bull Curry green as the contract called for. And here is McShane arguing because some of the fans thought Bull Curry should not have been painted green because he had injured his thumb. But McShane was armed with the paintbrush and ready to do a Rembrandt-like job on Mr. Bull Curry. But Curry's thumb was dislocated and Curry was having problems. And here you see Danny McShane telling one referee, Otto Koos, and Pepe Gomez, who handled that particular match, that he didn't care if Curry was in a cast. He wanted Curry, and he wanted to paint him. And so this was the start of the paint. You see Curry holding on to that thumb for dear life. You see McShane obviously enjoying what he's doing and painting belly button first on Mr. Bull Curry. And Curry here writhing in pain because of the problem with the thumb dislocation, sinks down to his knee, and McShane goes about really enjoying his work. Forward, backward, around. And if you think body painting is new, then you should have been around at this particular time. The color, a beautiful green, and Pepe Gomez trying to tell Danny McShane to get going. And McShane turning to Pepe Gomez and said, I earned this right, and I'm going to take my time and enjoy it all the way through. And this was exactly what he intended to do. He had more argument with Pepe Gomez, as Gomez says, get busy and paint because the man is hurt and he should be seen by a doctor. And finally there was an argument with McShane and Pepe Gomez, and this happened. And that beautiful cloud of green is the can of paint exploding over Danny McShane's head. And here is McShane racing around the ring, paint in his face, paint in his eyes, paint all over him, and he's looking for some place to hide. But Bull Curry knows an opportunity when he sees it. He picked up the paintbrush, and it's Bull Curry at work now to spread the paint and spread the word. And McShane here advanced on the cameraman, who was perched up on the top turnbuckle. And I was the cameraman, and I screamed, no, 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 Danny, not me. And Danny turned around and headed for the opposite direction, struck all the paint on the canvas, and down he went. And with all of the subsequent times that he tried to get up to his feet, he assumed this position because the paint was slippery on the soles of the feet. And here is McShane in several ungracious poses. And that is symbolic of the paint match on St. Patrick's Day. But right now we have a battle between Tony Bourne and Irish Danny McShane. And here you see McShane, who in his day was one of the toughest men that ever stepped into a ring, battling with Tony Bourne. This was a match that left McShane in this particular fashion. Now, this was the end of the second fall, and here you see McShane being led to the corner by his second, Pat Hatchell, and here you see the ending of the third fall as Tony Bourne took advantage of the injury and put the neck breaker on him. Now, this particular match had an argument that ensued. You see Leo Newman, the manager of Tony Bourne, in the middle there. But each had called each other a dirty jackass, and somebody decided that this animal here would be bathed by the loser. But McShane was out. He was out cold on the canvas, and he couldn't bathe the jackass. Into the ring sprang Mike Clancy and other wrestlers who decided that Leo the Lion Newman was the man who was going to bathe that jackass, and there's Red McKim in behind Leo the Lion, and they all lent their weight to the argument, and Leo took off his jacket and he went to work, and he started to scrub the jackass, and this was the action as he applied the brush and the soap suds, proving that he would do it. Now, in the background, you may see McShane from time to time lying there, but I could swear that Irish Danny McShane had one eye open. Somebody sneaked up behind him, and it was McShane who doused Leo the Lion Newman, soap suds, bucket, and all. And Leo went racing around that ring, trying to shake loose all the monsters that were crawling in his eyes, and the soap flowing in there. The wrestlers were bugging him. The jackass was after him. The man with the jackass tried to lead the two. The jackass came up and kicked him, or at least I think he's kicking him. I hope he's kicking him. And Leo the Lion Newman was backed up into the corner where Tony Bourne was handcuffed to the rope so that he wouldn't interfere with the action.
Okay, right now let's see if you fans at home can recognize these two redheads.
I'd just like to say it was a pleasure for me to have had the opportunity to wrestle in Texas throughout the 60s and 70s, wrestled many times in Houston where Paul Boesch was a promoter, and I must say he was one of the greatest promoters I had ever met. Not only a great promoter, but he was a fine gentleman. Outside of the ring, had many good times with him, and I'll never forget them. And once again, it certainly was my pleasure.
Looking forward to getting back to Houston. I would just like to take this opportunity to say, however, though, I have very, very fond memories of Houston, Texas, for one reason. That reason being Paul Boesch. He treated me and every other wrestler that I know like human beings. He treated us with dignity and with class. And I respect that man to my dying day.
I came to work for Paul Boesch, and the man treated me like a gentleman. We didn't see eye to eye on everything, but I'm gonna tell you something. Paul Boesch made the bull, made a lot of wrestlers around here. I'm not gonna name any names because some of them I don't like, or most of them I don't like. And I'm going to tell you something. Paul Boesch was one of the greatest that I ever met. With Paul Boesch, you didn't have no needs. You didn't have to ask for anything. Seemed like a man knew what you were out to do or whatever it was, he was there. The man was great. Like I said, Paul Boesch and I stayed on each other's, well, nerves or whatever else all the time because I didn't see eye to eye to very many of these guys here. But let me tell you, Paul Boesch, I know where you're at because you are one of the greatest and will always be one of the greatest in here.
Paul Boesch, what great, great memories I got about you. Orange, Texas. Houston, Texas. What a great promoter. What a great friend. Also, a kind gentleman. Paul Boesch, I salute you. Sayonara.
Mr. Bosch's wrestling career was interrupted by World War II, where Mr. Boesch served our country, earning the rank of captain in the Army, where he fought in the European theater. Mr. Boesch received 2 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and the French Croix de Guerre, which is the French equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Mr. Boesch remembered his military service in this book, Forest in Hell, The Rogue to Hergden. In 1947, Mr. Boesch became the commentator for the Houston Wrestling Television Show, a job he kept for 41 years. And throughout that 41 years of being the commentator for Houston Wrestling Television, Mr. Boesch never had a contract. See, Mr. Boesch was a man of honor. He did business on a handshake. A contract was not necessary. Mr. Boesch also was no stranger to television. In 1938, he was wrestling in New York City, and at the same time in 1938, New York City was hosting the World's Fair. Mr. Boesch went to the World's Fair. He was looking at a demonstration of a newfangled product called television, and the television show that day was centered around wrestling. The announcer was incorrectly calling the wrestling holes. Mr. Boesch corrected him, showed what the right hole was. At that time, the announcer said, "Sit down and be my color commentator." Mr. Boesch became the first sports color commentator in television history. Speaking of television shows, you can't have a television show run for 41 years without sponsors. And Houston Wrestling had a lot of great, colorful sponsors during its 41-year run on Houston television. The first sponsor to gain notoriety in our town was a man named Bill Farley, who owned a tire store. He had a speech impediment, and his pronunciation of the word tire made him famous throughout Houston, and he sold lots and lots of tires. It was also Bill Farley who climbed in the ring one Friday night after Waldo Von Erich had been defeated in his match and actually shaved the head of Waldo Von Erich right there on Houston television. Talk about great sponsors. How about Mr. Stubbs of the Stubbs Cycle Company, still doing very well today? Or how about Mr. Norman, a man you can trust in home improvement? And then, of course, there's the resident prankster, Mr. I.W. Mark.
While we were making the commercials, we always had a lot of fun. Mac was there, Doug Russell was there, and myself. And we'd visit for a while, and then I'd bump into Mac, and I'd take the money out of his pocket. He'd do his commercial, jump up and down, and look for his money. It wasn't there, he'd go berserk. And we always had a spare microphone pole there, and sometimes I'd sort of goose him while he's doing his commercial. He'd jump out of his skin. He was a lot of fun. And, but that was the atmosphere that Paul created. Paul created an atmosphere of comfort for the sponsors and fun for us. And we sort of missed going down there on Friday night. I sort of miss Paul. As you know, Paul had huge cauliflower ears. I guess that was his Purple Heart of the wrestling ring. And every time we got out to dinner, I'd always make fun of his ears. He loved when I did it, incidentally. And one time I told him, and my wife lays claim to this, that she asked him to wear earrings and do an ad for the store. But it was really my idea. And I told him, I said, Joe Namath did pantyhose and Pavarotti did furs. Bosch, you got to do earrings. He loved the idea. We did a newsprint ad. We took the pictures right here in our store, in our employee lounge. And one of the local magazines wouldn't run it. They thought it was not too right for a man to be wearing earrings, so we sent it to Texas Monthly. Texas Monthly published the ad. It was written up in Ad Week, Ad Age. Everybody was talking about it. I started getting calls from ad agencies telling me how great it was and they wish they thought of it. And we lived on the glory of that print ad for quite a while. Paul even made reprints of it, and I think 10,000 of them. And he said, here, give them out to all your people that asked for them. And he took about 10,000 of them, and I think sent them out to every wrestler in the world. About 6 months later, we were trying to figure out how we can do a film of the same ad. Well, one day we were filming our commercial. When there wasn't wrestling, we'd film in the Channel 39 studio. And we said, well, let's try and do it. So Paul dressed like he dressed in the ad with the hat, and we had the earrings. We posed him like the print ad was. And I know I was turning the chair while he turned into the camera, and he did the ad.
If I.W. Marks can make my ears look pretty, think what he can do for hers.
The ad turned out to be priceless. Paul loved it. People would call and ask us to run the ad. To this day, we haven't run that ad in 5 years. People still call us at least once or twice a week. When are we going to run the Paul Boesch ad? The day Paul passed away, we were at a luncheon. And we were sitting at the head table. I was sitting up there with Paul. And somebody asked a question about the earring ad. And Paul jumped out of his skin. He said, 50 years in wrestling, 35 years on television, and all I'll ever be remembered for is that doggone earring ad. But he loved it. He was proud of it. When we opened our business, we were just a mom-and-pop store, not struggling, doing okay. But I was just getting tired of being a mom-and-pop store, so we decided to go on wrestling with Paul Boesch. And the first weekend, we had a result of customers coming in that was unbelievable. And it wasn't because I was doing a commercial. It wasn't because I.W. Marks was on wrestling. It was because Paul Boesch was standing next to me in the commercials. His credibility gave us the momentum to grow to where we are today, which is the largest independent jeweler in Houston. And for that, we're very, very grateful to Paul.
Mr. Boesch was my hero. When I first started in television, it was 1983. My first television commercial was at Houston Wrestling. I went down to the Sam Houston Coliseum. There was a giant crowd there, and lots of established advertisers had already done their spots, like Irv Marks and Mr. Norman, some of the other people. I was scared to death. And I went up there to do that live spot with Mr. Boesch. He put his arm around me. He said, don't worry about it, kid. I'll help you get it through, and I'll bring you some customers. The reason Gallery Furniture is still in business today is because of what Mr. Boesch did for us with the great Houston Wrestling Show. He was a man. When he put his arm around you, you established the fact that you were a good person and people would come out and buy things from us. I'll never forget one Sunday morning. It had been raining very heavily in Houston. We ran those ads on Houston Wrestling Saturday night before, and then Sunday morning between 10:30 and 11:30. There was 3 foot of water in front of our store. Nobody could get to the store. But because of Houston Wrestling, because Mr. Boesch said, go out there, they're having a big sale this Sunday, people literally waded through knee-deep, waist-deep water to get to the store, and we did over $100,000 in business that day. That was the type of person Mr. Boesch was. Never forget the last time I saw Mr. Boesch. I was doing a speech at the Chamber of Commerce one cold, almost icy February night. In fact, it was icy in Cleveland, Texas. Now, Cleveland, Texas is located 60 miles from Gallery Furniture on the north side. From Mr. Boesch's home here in Sugar Land, it's got to be, what, 110 miles. And I went out there to do that speech that night. I could barely make it there through all the ice. When I got there, lo and behold, Mr. Boesch was there to introduce me. He had driven 110 miles to introduce me. That's the type of person Paul Boesch was, and I'll always remember him. I think about him every day.
Hi, I'm Tom Pritchard, and it's because of Paul Boesch that I was able to get into professional wrestling. I first met Paul Boesch when I was around 14 years old, I guess, and he let me take pictures around the ringside. I was writing magazine articles and things of this sort. And Paul, later on, let me work in his wrestling office, which was great for someone like me who loved the sport of professional wrestling and who really wanted to get close to it. And later on, he got me in touch with wrestlers such as Nick Kozak, the Iron Sheik, and things like this, who allowed me to get in the ring over at Nick Kozak's record service, as a matter of fact, and learn how to take the wrestling holds, learn the ins and outs of professional wrestling. And I remember one time I was sitting at the office on 1919 Carolina at the corner of Pierce, and Paul came in and happened to put this down by my side, which says, "To Tom Pritchard, this is my last wrestling license. Save it along with your first." This was in September of 1977. And along of October, I did get my first wrestling license. And I've always saved that along with this next to each other. And this happens to be my most treasured prize I've ever got through the years of professional wrestling. No matter what title, no matter what trophy you get, I'll never forget this. Thank you very much, Paul.
Want to see the Rolling Stones? Mitsubishi Motors 39 KHTV and Rock 101 KLOL want to fly you and a friend to L.A. on America West Airlines for the Rolling Stones October 19th concert, including a rental car and hotel stay. Get to Sharpstown Center, go inside and check out the all-new 1995 Eclipse from Mitsubishi, the new thinking in automobiles. Then pick up your entry blank, fill it out, and send it off to 39 KHTV. You can also win one of 50 other prizes from Rock 101 KLOL. Deadline is September 12th, so get moving.
My name is Tiger Conway Sr. I'm here today just to tell you fans, tell you people here in Houston, today is Paul Boesch Day. And I really appreciate the pleasure of being here today. Paul is gone, and every day of my life I think about Paul. Mr. Boesch was so close to me and my family. He's the one who got me involved in wrestling years ago. And he is responsible for getting me into the championship, I would say. He was a promoter. Before he was a promoter, he was like a newscaster. And then he went on, became a promoter. And he was one of the best promoters in Texas today. He was loved by a lot of people. He also had special rules, and if you went by those rules, you was a good guy in his book. So I miss, my family and I miss Paul so much. And one day, Paul, I want you to know that we all gonna meet one day. We don't know when, we don't know how, but we all gonna be there one day. And I hope, God, that you are in heaven, and we'll meet there.
Ted, I have a question for you.
Shoot.
You know who invented the cage match?
Of course I do. None other than Paul Boesch. We all know that Paul Boesch was a great innovator in professional wrestling. I mean, if you can look around this room, this is the history of wrestling as far as Paul Boesch. I mean, every one of these pictures tells a story. And what is now commonly known or referred to as a cage match, in the beginning was called a fence match, and Bruce, tell me.
Well, what happened was there was a match in Galveston, Texas, and it involved a wrestler by the name of Bull Curry, who we've seen earlier. And Bull was probably one of the wildest wrestlers ever.
Without a doubt.
And they could not contain Bull Curry inside the ring. So Paul Boesch had an idea. He surrounded the ring with a fishing net. That wasn't strong enough to keep Bull Curry inside the confines of the ring. So then Paul Boesch developed the cage. He surrounded the ring with a cyclone fence that kept Bull Curry contained inside the ring. And right now we have a match that involves two guys who also needed to settle their differences inside of the steel cage. It involves Gino Hernandez and Super Sock Jose Lothario.
I can't wait to see this.
Lothario moves in as Gino Hernandez, with blood running down his face from the constant banging crash into the fence, is urged. Jose is urged on by these fans. They want him to blast him, and he did that with a left There's nothing wrong with that left arm right now, I'll tell you that. And if it did hurt him, he didn't care. Oh, man. A smash in that Gino Hernandez. And his face is covered with blood here from the contact with that fence. Drove him over that top rope. His feet were off the floor when he crashed into the fence itself and dropped back. The man down is Hernandez, and Jose is trying to make certain that he does not recover from this one. And he come in there beautifully. This could be a fall. So fall number 5. Fall number 5 goes to Jose Lothario.
Seconds, the winner of the 5th fall, Jose Lothario.
And Jose Lothario is now 4-3, but this doesn't mean much until he takes the last fall. The referee, Branko Lubic, gave Gino the right to capitulate in that fall when actually that's the referee's prerogative, but the point should be that Gino Hernandez has the option to quit for the whole match. And this is what Jose Lothario was trying to drag out of him, trying to get him to concede. So with less than 10 seconds remaining in this, the 8th fall coming up. There's the bell, the sound of 8. Listen. So Gino Hernandez is up. Jose Lothario moving in, protecting that left arm on which Lothario worked, and there was no doubt that Lothario was anxious to work on that arm for the simple reason that he knows what Gino would do to his arm if he could. Front headlock for Lothario. And, oh, man, the strain and the pressure that puts on the deck itself. There it is, that same driving lift. And Branko Lubic looking close. There's the cinching of that front headlock as you notice where he's grabbing him up above the elbow, and he has his own arm. So he puts that on to keep that neck twisted, keep the head turned, keep pressure on a man who right now must be feeling that pressure to the utmost. You saw him drive the tips of his fingers into the throat, and Gino Hernandez just dropped on that top turnbuckle and on the rope, and this is the most dangerous spot that Jose Lothario has been in yet. The 8th fall, and Gino Hernandez has won it by lifting Jose Lothario up and dropping him on the top turnbuckle, nasty fashion. And you can bet that Lothario is right now in the most difficult spot he has been in since this match began. We will have fall number 9 coming up right now. Fall number 9. But Jose is down, trying to get up. He is in a bad way. There is 15 seconds remaining here. The crowd is screaming for Jose. And bad sign. Jose started up and then fell over and is doubled up. There goes the bell. There is the count. The crowd isn't counting as loudly and as enthusiastic. Few people are counting, but the rest of them are trying to destroy the count. They want Jose to get up, and the fall and the match in this fence match goes to Gino Hernandez. He is the winner.
Without a doubt, one of the greatest wrestling matches and one of the greatest rivalries ever in Houston wrestling history, involving two of the greatest, Jose Lothario and the late Gino Hernandez. Right now, we'd like to pay tribute to a man who gave so much to Houston wrestling and to the wrestling industry itself, the late, great Gino Hernandez.
I was the youngest guy to ever wrestle in Madison Square Garden at the age of 19. I've been the American heavyweight champion. I've been the world junior heavyweight champion, one half of the world tag team champions. I've been the youngest man to ever wrestle in the Arena Mexico in Mexico City. I've been the youngest man to hold the American heavyweight title. I won that in Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan. I know for a fact that I was one of the youngest wrestlers ever to go tour Japan, and I know for a fact also that I'm the youngest man to ever wrestle the world heavyweight champion. And I think I've accomplished more at the age of 23 in wrestling than most wrestlers accomplish in a lifetime.
Hi, my name is Jose Lotario, and I'm over here for one reason. You know, to me and to most of everybody in the wrestling business, Paul Boesch was one of the greatest promoters you ever want to see. He was a kind man, good man, and he was the type of man that he never see anybody with different color, black, yellow, white, or whatever, he always treat everybody the right way. To me, I learned a lot from him, and I wish he was alive so I can tell him thank you very much once more time, because he really gave me a great push to me and a great inspiration for me to come down. You know, we have say in Mexico, nadie sabe lo que tiene hasta que lo ve perdido, which means nobody knows what you had till you lost it. And we lost a great man, believe you me. Because to me, he was the type of man, everybody called him or everybody talked to him. He always was there helping one way or another one. He helped the community so many times, and I know that a fact because I was with him sometimes, try to help the men and help the community, here in Houston and all the way around. So I do have a lot of respect for the man, and like I said before, it's very bad that he's not with us anymore, but I hope God take care of him now because, you know, it's in the better hands than anybody can be. Ahora quiero mandar un mensaje a todos mis buenos amigos. Quiero reconocer este tributo que se le está haciendo al buen amigo Paul Boesch, un hombre que le dio oportunidad a mucha gente, a muchos mexicanos. Y para mí ha sido un orgullo y seguirá siendo un orgullo y un respeto muy inefectivo para este gran hombre que le dio oportunidad a todos los luchadores mientras estuvo vivo y hizo muchas familias felices viendo por televisión. Así es que quiero con todo mi respeto para el señor Paul Boesch y agradecer todo lo que ha hecho por todos nosotros. Muchas gracias. Les habló su amigo y servidor, José Lotario.
Once there was a cow named Belle who could sing. She was enchanting to all who heard her. Everyone agreed Belle's singing was superb. And her milk was divine. And to this day, there's a little Belle in every bite of Bluebell ice cream.
This is Jim Cornette. You know, when you talk about the glory years of Houston wrestling, the longest running wrestling program of its kind in the history of the United States, right here on Channel 39, you talk about one guy, because Paul Boesch, after all, he was the king of Houston wrestling. And I knew Paul Boesch real well, but even before I came to Houston, I'd always heard Houston was the wrestling capital of the world. If you weren't in the Sam Houston Coliseum on a Friday night, brother, you weren't anybody. Well, finally, me and Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, the Midnight Express, we got the chance to come there to Houston and appear at the Sam Houston Coliseum. And I know you people always remember Bill Watts and Stagger Lee, Junkyard Dog, when that line was 4 abreast around the side of the Coliseum, the biggest crowd that had ever seen a wrestling match. And it was promoted by Paul Boesch. And you know, the one thing that I didn't like about Paul Boesch, that I could never stand about Paul Boesch, it was impossible not to like him. No matter how many times I came down there and insulted the rednecks around Texas, no matter how many times I came down there and insulted the people of Houston, insulted Houston wrestling, insulted everything about the place, every time me and the Midnight Express walked in that locker room and set our bags down on a Friday night, Paul Boesch would walk up and try to shake my hand. He was the only guy in wrestling that could outdress me. And when I heard Paul Boesch passed away, I knew that Houston wrestling was never going to be the same. And I appreciate the chance to be part of a tribute to Paul Boesch because, above all, he was the most honest, the #1 promoter, not only in Houston wrestling history, but in the history of wrestling in the United States. And I appreciate this opportunity.
You know, I don't think I've ever heard Jim Cornette so humble, but then again, he's reminiscing about Paul Boesch and his days in Houston.
I'll have to agree with you.
You know, and he has a lot to reminisce about. Because Jim Cornette and his Midnight Express were involved in a match involving a scaffold 20 feet above the ring.
That's right, and it's one of the most dangerous matches of all matches in professional wrestling.
All right, now what you're looking at here, Ted, do you remember this? This is a scaffold match, all right? They're wrestling 20 feet above the Coliseum floor, 16 feet above the ring. Now, the object of this matchup was they wrestled on the scaffold match, a tag team match. It's Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express and his partner Ricky Morton against Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton of the Midnight Express. What was the object, Ted?
The object of this match is to stay on the scaffold, because as soon as you leave the scaffold, whether you're hanging from it or whatever, you go from the scaffold, either to the mat or all the way to the floor, heaven forbid, and it's over.
It is all over in more ways than one. You lost the match, and you could lose a lot more. There's Bobby Eaton hanging off the edge as Ricky Morton trying to knock him all the way off the scaffold. Now, Paul Boesch in Houston, Texas. Paul was an innovator. Paul always brought the best, the newest.
And the most unique, without a doubt, in matches and stipulations, tile matches to the Sam Houston Coliseum. And this, without a doubt, is one of the most awesome that I've ever seen. And, hey, I've been in a lot, as you know, a lot of different stipulation matches and a lot of stipulations in one, as we will soon see. But this I have never done. Quite frankly, I never would do.
Well, I was there that night, November 23rd, 1984. That was a long time ago, Ted.
I was around then, too. What are you trying to say, Bruce?
You were around then.
Yes, I was. I'm still around.
Now, look at this. Imagine being 20 feet above the ground and having to wrestle, Ted. Now, I never saw you on a scaffold match.
And you never will. Look at that. I mean, I would be too concerned about staying on the scaffold as opposed to even worried about wrestling. I just don't know how these guys did it. I really don't.
One wrong move, one slip, and your career is over.
Your career, possibly your life.
Very possibly.
Oh.
That was Dennis Condrey hitting his own partner, Bobby Eaton, as Robert Gibson's hanging on for dear life.
Now, if refresh my memory now, they're wrestling as a team, but only as soon as one member of a team leaves the scaffold and hits the mat, then it's over, right?
Well, in this particular matchup, both members of the team had to be knocked off the scaffold in order for the other team to win. And Jim Cornette, the Midnight Express's manager, now the manager of the Heavenly Bodies, he was on the outside on the floor, and he was terrified for his own team.
Oh, powder. Somebody got powdered.
Well, it looks like advantage Midnight Express right now, but...
No, refresh my memory again. Say one member of each team hits the floor, then there's only one guy on each team left, and the first one, regardless of which team it is that hits the mat, then the other team's a winner.
That's right.
Well, I think it speaks for itself as far as how dangerous it is. I mean, when I was there too, Bruce Pritchard.
Yes, you were.
And before this match took place, and the arena was empty, I walked out, I climbed up, and I stood on top of that scaffold, and that was close enough for me. I take my hat off to all these guys for having the guts to get up there.
Well, both these teams went into this match with reckless abandon. They wrestled on the scaffold as if they were in a 20-by-20 ring. It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable. As you can see right now, Robert Gibson holding on for dear life.
And Dennis Condrey doing it. Robert's almost off.
Now, you can climb all over the scaffold. You can hang on. As long as your feet don't hit the mat, you're still in the game.
You're still in the game as long as your feet don't hit the mat or the floor. And there's Ricky Morton on the other end of the scaffold trying to kick Bobby Eaton of the Midnight Express off.
Now, you know, I don't know, was this idea, was the idea for this particular match, was this a creation of Paul Boesch, or was it a match that the wrestlers came up with?
Well, Paul Boesch had these two teams wrestle in Houston many, many times, and a score had to be settled. And they were both high-flying teams, two of the best tag teams ever to wrestle in the Sam Houston Coliseum. And Paul said they were in the air so much, why not put them in the air and maybe ground one of them permanently?
Well, being a high flyer is one thing, but climbing Mount Everest is another. Excuse me, but I don't think so.
Look at Bobby Eaton. He's trying to work his way away from Ricky Morton, but underneath the scaffold. He'll do anything to get away from Ricky Morton.
Oh, look at this.
Robert Gibson on the other side trying to kick Bobby Eaton off.
You know, like I said, I was there. Oh, there goes one man down.
That's Eaton down. Bobby Eaton is down, and his manager, Jim Cornette, in the ring. I believe Bobby dislocated his hip that night. And look, and now the Rock and Roll Express double teaming Dennis Condrey high above the scaffold. I think it's advantage right now, Rock and Roll Express. Dennis hanging on for dear life, but he's got to work at both ends, and it looks like
it's all over.
It is all over.
Well, it's certainly a tribute to Paul Boesch for his ingenuity, because he brought many exciting matches to Sam Houston Coliseum and Houston
But
Wrestling.
Ted, as we're going to see in just a few minutes, this wasn't the only strange match that Paul Boesch came up with.
I was in a few myself.
You know, here in Houston, there have been a lot of matches that involved a lot of stipulations. I mean, matter of fact, we've had matches where brass knucks were legal. I mean, they've had a lot of different stipulated matches here in Houston. I mean, Paul Boesch has been in a lot of matches. We've had Texas death matches. You ever been in a Texas death match, Ted?
Yep, been there.
We've had matches where, get this, actually, both wrestlers wore tuxedos in the match. You haven't?
Been in that, too.
I mean, we've had matches inside steel cages.
Been in that.
We've had matches where they put a coal miner's glove on a pole, and if you could climb the pole and get the glove, you could use it in the match. You ever?
Been in that one, too.
And, well, of course, we've had matches where the loser had to leave town, couldn't come back and wrestle. And you
had to bring that up, didn't you? As a matter of fact, and you know, Bruce Pritchard, because you were there, that I've been in all of those matches, night in my career, all in one night, right here in Houston at the Sam Houston Coliseum.
That's right.
And to tell you the truth, I didn't really appreciate the time off.
Let's take a look at it. And now for those of you fans sitting at home that don't recognize this young, clean-shaven gentleman, the one we saw just a minute ago, that's Hacksaw Jim Duggan right there.
Yeah, please don't mistake me.
The gentleman we saw a minute ago is one Ted DiBiase.
That's right. Ooh, look at that cheap shot.
Now this match, Ted, refresh my memory. This was a cage match. You're both in tuxedos, as we can see here, and there's a coal miner's glove on a pole. If you get it, you can use it. Duggan doesn't look like he needs it right now.
Yeah, I was wanting it real bad at this moment.
Now, Paul Boesch had a neck. Paul Boesch came up with more matches that had stipulations, and this had to top them off.
Yes, it did. And I can't say that I was really anxious to partake in this match, but, well, as you can see, things weren't quite going my way. Oh.
I don't blame you. I remember I was the one that locked you inside the cage that night. You were a little hesitant to get in the cage. Well, yes,
now look at this. You see, I've always been known as being a very fair technical wrestler, and look what Duggan's doing to me here. I mean...
But you have to admit, Hacksaw Jim Duggan does look good in a tuxedo.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that.
Well, then again, he's pounding on your back.
Yeah, he is.
But, Ted, you know, even in all your years in wrestling, and now you still do sport the tuxedo look as the $1 Million Man.
Yes.
And in all your years of wrestling, was this the first time you wrestled in a tuxedo?
Believe me, this was the first time. I mean, I'm probably one of the few wrestlers in wrestling today that can say that I took part individually in cage matches. What do you call it? The
coal miner's glove match?
Gloves match with the pole. Dressed in a tuxedo.
Texas death match.
Texas death match. But all of these matches were combined into one match in this match right here. We're dressed in tuxedos. We're in the cage. I don't know if you can see it right here, but there is a pole in one of the corners. At the top of that pole, there's a coal miner's glove, which is loaded, by the way. And if you can get to it, you can use it. And this match, as well, was a Texas death match, meaning as long as you keep answering the bell, the match continues.
That's right.
If you fail to answer the bell and you are counted out, then the match is over.
And whoever lost this match
that's right,
had to leave.
You had to remind me, didn't you?
Well, I believe you took an extended vacation. Well, I don't want to give that away. But here you see Ted. Now
you're really enjoying this, I can tell, Bruce.
Well, I am. I remember this match.
Well, I'm enjoying this
very
part.
much so.
No, this is a little more like it.
But Paul Boesch, you know, I mean, there were so many firsts in Houston wrestling. There were so many firsts. Paul Boesch, his mind was always going. He always wanted to bring the fans the very best. And just when you thought you'd seen it all,
he gave you something new. And I will say this, you know, and I quote myself, I guess, the $1 Million Man. The bottom line is, when you went to Houston, regardless of what, you know, like this is a main event in the Sam Houston Coliseum, which meant a very big payday for yours truly. And that's why I kept coming back.
And right now, you're going up for that coal miner's glove.
That's right. What's he doing? You know, well,
that's some dangerous territory up there. But right now, we're going to go to the closing moments of this match.
Do we have to?
Well, you may not remember, but let's show the fans. And right now, Ted, you have climbed that pole. You have the coal miner's glove on your hand, but what are you doing with it?
Well, obviously, I'm trying to hang on to it, and as you can see, I wasn't able to do that. I'm going to tell you something. All kidding aside, this is probably one of the toughest matches that I was ever involved in. You can see this thing got really nasty. And you get into a match like this, it's brutal. It's
Hey, I don't blame you for trying to get out of the cage there.
well,
Oh!
see ya. I can't remember anything from here. You're gonna have to fill me in.
Well, I believe what comes next is the inevitable. And Hacksaw Jim Duggar covering Ted DiBiase for the pin in one of the most brutal and grueling matches I've ever witnessed. My hat goes off to you for participating in the first place, Ted. But this was the type of action. This is what Paul Boesch delivered to the fans of Houston and to the fans of Houston wrestling.
You would have to pick one where I didn't win, huh? Thanks a lot, pal.
Well, I couldn't find any other one.
Well, I don't believe that.
Nearly 10 years ago, a 19-year-old boy strolled into the Fort Sam Houston Coliseum with his good friend and mentor, Jose Lothario, and for the first time wrestled in his home state of Texas. That young man was none other than the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And it would be my pleasure to be a part of the tribute for Paul Boesch, one of the most respected wrestling promoters of all time. Paul Boesch, you hold a very special place in the heart of the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, and it has been one heck of a ride.
Hi, I'm Ed Worthington, the producer of tonight's show, and for 10 years was the director of Houston Wrestling with Paul Boesch. And I have to say, working with Paul and doing the show, it's the most fun you could possibly have at work. And I'm at 1919 Caroline at the corner of Pierce and downtown Houston, which was once the most famous sporting address here in the city. It's a parking lot now, part of the St. Joseph Hospital system. But as I look around, it seems to me that there needs to be a plaque or a statue commemorating Paul, war hero, and ambassador to the city. By far, one of the neatest men that I've ever worked with or ever met. In my life, I've had 3 heroes: my dad, Roy Rogers, and Paul Boesch. It was my privilege to work with Paul. And a lot of people's lives were touched by Paul Boesch, and there needs to be some memento in this town so we can remember a guy that touched so much of our lives.
Paul Boesch, he was one in a million. He was a great promoter, a great wrestler. Paul Boesch had personality, he had integrity, and he was a good friend to a whole lot of people. The city of Houston is very fortunate to been able to work with Paul Boesch over the years, and it was a good association for everyone. He meant so much, not only to wrestling, but to the community of Houston, and he had an effect on millions of people's lives. It's kind of hard to sit here and talk about him because he was such a very special person. He had, he was a strange guy. He befriended a lot of wrestlers who were not main eventers. He took them under his wing. He was pleasant to everyone, and that didn't happen in a lot of territories and promotions. Matter of fact, the thing that the best thing I can say about him, if they had a Hall of Fame for promoters, he'd be chairman of the board. We miss him.
Everybody loved the action on Houston wrestling. One of the parts I really enjoyed was the incredible interviews Mr. Boesch did with a huge cast of characters of great wrestlers he brought to Houston. Let's watch the following film and see how many of these wonderful wrestlers you can remember from the great days of Houston wrestling.
This is a conspiracy, Paul Boesch, so I'm holding you responsible, Boesch. You wait and see what I do to him, Paul Boesch.
That's right, Mr. Boesch.
That's right, Mr. Boesch.
Like I know who you are. You are Paul Boesch, the greatest wrestling promoter in the history of the world.
I'm going to promise you, Mr. Boesch.
Lord have mercy, Paul Boesch, lock up the women and the children.
Let me tell you something, Paul Boesch.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Paul Boesch. I respect your opinion.
I am very truthful, Mr. Boesch.
Tim, who? Let me tell you right now, Paul Boesch, I'll put it to you as a promoter, you better come up with a little bit better competition than that. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Boesch. Well, you know something, Paul Boesch? I don't care anymore. I don't care anymore.
And this is where it is, the biggest and the toughest has come right here to home, Paul.
Paul Boesch, you are a Texan. You know there's a lot of things going on here, Mr. Boesch. That's all. If you're bad enough, if you're big enough, if you're mad enough, bring yourself on to Houston, brother. Talk to Mr. Boesch and get yourself in the ring. Let me tell you, Mr. Boesch, I don't really care what you think.
Well, you know, Mr. Boesch, I've been coming from Houston for a long time, and you know that.
You know what's going to happen now, Mr. Boesch? Is that Butch Reed is going to pull all stops.
You are not going to be allowed here in the Coliseum next Friday night. You will not be permitted to come in the doors.
What you think, Paul Boesch.
That's what I said.
I've got the most powerful attorneys that this country has to offer. And nobody that walks the face of this earth, including Paul Boesch, the great Houston impresario, can keep me from being at ringside or in this building. So get it and get it good, Boesch. It looks like you would have learned a long time ago, boy. You don't stick your nose in the Freebirds' business. You don't spit in the wind, and you don't stick your nose in our business, Dr. Death and DiBiase. The same thing is going to happen to you. Like I said, we are the big daddies of professional wrestling.
And Sam Houston Coliseum is the place. Bill Mascaris and Tito Santana as partners. Bill, it's a pleasure to have you back again, always. Thank you. And I'm sure you have a surprise for
I'll keep a surprise. Just like stealing a piece of board from the White House. And you know the president put you in jail, and Mr. Two and the dog is going to put somebody else in jail.
And good luck to both of you.
I'm the greatest wrestler alive. I'm not talking about rock and roll music, and I'm not talking about Hollywood, California. We're talking about the marquee that says professional wrestling. That's what I represent. I'm the man that makes professional wrestling what it is today.
Afternoon, I was in I.W. Marks when a courier came in and delivered diamonds.
That's right, Paul.
Everybody out there knows I back it up.
I don't even know you.
That's right.
James J. Dillon retired from his active career a little over 5 years ago, and now I sit behind a desk at the corporate offices of the World Wrestling Federation. But I often reflect back on my career that spanned some 25 years, and some of my fondest memories are of right here in Houston, Texas. Because in my day, it was an honor to wrestle for Paul Boesch in Houston, Texas. And the criteria for success in the wrestling profession at that time was, number one, did you wrestle in Madison Square Garden in New York? And did you wrestle in Houston, Texas for Paul Boesch? And if you could answer yes to both of those questions, you knew in your own mind that you'd reached the pinnacle of the wrestling profession. Because Paul Boesch had the reputation throughout the world of bringing the very finest wrestlers from all corners of the world to wrestle right here in Houston, Texas. He delivered what the fans wanted to see, and they were very, very loyal to him because they knew that he was giving them each and every week at the Sam Houston Coliseum what they wanted to see. And during my many years that brought me to Houston, Texas, I managed the likes of the Mongolian Stomper, I managed Moondog Mayne, Ken Patera, and a Japanese team of Mr. Hito and Mr. Sakurada. And I didn't always see eye to eye with Paul Boesch because his first loyalty was to the fans. And I have to admit that I have 3 reoccurring nightmares, all of which took place right here in Houston, Texas. The first of which was a night that I was managing Moondog Mayne, and a night when he faced Jose Lothario, who was managed by an old nemesis of mine named Playboy Gary Hart. And somehow, if Moondog Mayne came up short that night, I was going to have to eat a can of dog food. And I don't want to go into what happened, but I can tell you for a good month after that match, I still had the taste of dog food in my mouth, and I never forgave Paul Boesch for that. And another time, in fact, the only time in my career that I wrestled a 500-pound brown bear was right in the Sam Houston Coliseum, and again, because I failed to read the small print on one of Paul Boesch's contracts. The last nightmare that I have is of the night that I actually faced Paul Boesch in the ring, and it was probably his last appearance as a wrestler, and he was well up in years, and there was a big bathtub full of water in the ring, and I thought, boy, this is my opportunity to show not only Paul Boesch, but everybody in the world that Paul Boesch was all wet and I was right. But when it was all said and done and the match was over and I was sitting back in the locker room, I was the one that was soaking wet, and Paul Boesch had the last laugh. Paul, you're gone, but you'll never be forgotten. And with the loss of Paul Boesch, professional wrestling lost a great friend. Paul, wherever you are, I think about you often, and I salute you.
50th anniversary, just like it happened yesterday. The biggest break of Tito Santana's career. And I want to thank the man, God bless his soul, Paul Boesch, for giving me the opportunity to participate in that big tournament that he had. I defeated the likes of Nick Bockwinkel, Ken Patera, Tully Blanchard, Gino Hernandez. It was a big, big day, a big tournament for Tito Santana the day I won that 50th anniversary. Enfrente de toda la gente que me está escuchando, para todos los latinos, todos los mexicanos de aquí, de Houston, Texas, y por todas partes que me apoyaron y que me ayudaron a ganar aquí en Houston, Texas, me ayudaron a empezar una carrera que ha salido muy buena para Tito Santana. Again, the men that made it all possible for me, that gave me the biggest opportunity, the biggest break in a young career of Tito Santana's, was Paul Boesch. God bless his soul. Thank you very much. And thank you all the fans for being there and helping me through the victory in Houston, Texas for the 50th anniversary.
I love the guy. He did an awful lot for wrestling, but his influence on Houston and in Texas generally extended far beyond the wrestling arena. He was a decent, good man. He was a family man, and he will always have my respect, and Barbara's too. I wish I were going to be there to honor him and to see this wonderful program that you all are doing on Paul Boesch, but just record Barbara Bush and George Bush as two undying fans, strong, supportive fans of the great Paul Boesch. He's a dear friend, and when he passed away, we lost a close, personal friend.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vince McMahon of the World Wrestling Federation, and I would like to say, had there not been pioneers like Paul Boesch, there wouldn't be a World Wrestling Federation today. And I'd like to take this opportunity to salute Channel 39 for paying tribute to one of the all-time greats in professional wrestling, Mr. Paul Boesch.
Well, gentlemen, what I think we've seen here today is just a small fraction of what the life of Paul Boesch in the wrestling world encompasses, but it was a very good part. It was a pleasure to be able to be here and to go back and reminisce. Speaking for my late father, Iron Mike DiBiase, he had great respect for Paul Boesch, and I have much to thank Paul for, and I just feel privileged to have had the opportunity to come here and pay my respects.
Well, you know, I have to share those sentiments. Paul Boesch meant an awful lot to me, bringing me up in the wrestling industry and teaching me everything. And I remember as a kid growing up watching Paul and admiring him so very much. And after Paul passed away, his wife, no, let me take this off here, gave me a very special gift. It was a ring that was made in 1950. There were only two rings made like it in the entire world. It was a wrestling ring. And unfortunately, in 1967, Paul was driving down Interstate 10, and he was littering. He threw some trash out the window and lost the ring. He never found it. He had two more subsequently made and passed away with the third ring. But a year after Paul passed away, a gentleman called Mrs. Boesch and said he was changing his tire on the side of the road in 1967. He found the ring, and he wanted her to have it back. He was moving. He lost the ring when he went home and was moving, gave her the ring back. And Mrs. Boesch gave this ring to me, and I cherish it. I wear it, and I cherish it. And this is my part of Paul Boesch that I'll never forget, and I keep him with me at all times.
That's great.
Mr. Boesch was a great man. He was my hero. I want to finish with this poem written by Mr. Boesch. If I should die, leaving words unsaid, tender words still in my heart, face not the future in morbid dread. Of silent years while we are apart. Listen, the words are on each whispering breeze. They shout out boldly from roaring seas. Perhaps sigh softly through rustling trees. There is much of me in each of these. If I should die leaving deeds undone, goals just beyond my eager reach, weep not for tasks barely begun, lessons I learned but did not teach. Look, twilight horizon stretching afar, an autumn leaf a beckoning star, daffodils dancing at a spring bazaar. These have I fashioned and left where you are. If I should die leaving thoughts unexpressed, lines